Okay, well, joining us now from McLean, Virginia, is John Sitilides. He is a geopolitical strategist with Trilogy Advisors. John, great to have you with us. John, we're talking about, of course, these meetings that took place in Alaska over the past 2 days. First, I'd like your view on what you made of the meetings. And the other thing that John Gong just raised a moment ago, saying that to a large extent, China policy for this administration is dictated to some extent by sentiment in the United States Congress, and we know that sentiment is pretty hostile towards China. So what did you make of it all?
Well, much to unpack in terms of the actual meetings, Anand, and I think it was very unfortunate that we had this very acrimonious exchange between the parties. I thought it was unusual that the United States would welcome the Chinese delegation to Alaska, but really have no preconditions for the meeting, and then lay out a number of issues that probably in front of the Chinese media and the global media would put the Chinese in a position where they thought they had to defend their position, and to do so in a very lengthy and an almost belligerent manner. And so I think it fell apart pretty quickly for both sides, and it was a very unfortunate start to what should be a very important process. You have the two largest economies in the world. They're in danger of entering into a Cold War-like competition, and they have to find superior ways of managing the relationship, especially at the outset of the Biden administration. So it's a very unfortunate start, and a very, very large number of issues to deal with on the geopolitical front, security, trade, technology, and the like. And I don't know how they unravel this mess in the months to come, except that the Chinese government seems keen on arranging a summit with President Biden, maybe in the hopes that General Secretary Xi is able to speak with President Biden one-on-one and look to see if they can bypass some of these confrontational issues and work at an arrangement on something that President Biden would like to score a deal on, such as climate change, nuclear non-proliferation, or maybe dealing with Afghanistan or Iran.
That is an interesting point you raised there, John, about how this meeting opened up. I mean, you've been involved with the State Department with these kinds of meetings. Whose idea was that, do you think, and why? I haven't seen that before. Have you, where cameras are allowed in? I mean, I've seen cameras go into meetings, and it's basically a photo op for about 5 minutes or so, and then all the camera people and the journalists leave, and then they get down to business. But they were conducting business with the cameras still in front of them.
That was where it was very unusual here, Anand. And Secretary Blinken and National Security Advisor Sullivan are both very intelligent, very skilled, very experienced diplomats, and they know their material well. But what I thought was interesting was to lay out a very detailed list of issues that the parties were certainly going to be raising in private over the course of 2-day meetings, but to put out this list in public and then have the Chinese government, I believe, essentially be prepared for that type of an arrangement where the two Chinese delegation leaders spoke at length and in great detail and in very harsh tones, especially in trying to put the United States on the defensive in terms of domestic policies, so as to prevent the U.S. from being able to criticize China on a whole host of human rights and regional affairs. So I don't know how this came about. I don't know how it's going to be rectified, but I know it puts the two parties in a very difficult position for the time being, even though I noted in the Chinese media, I think in the Global Times, there was a reference to the possibility that this could lead to a meaningful dialogue in the very near future.
Victor Gao, we've been talking a lot about the differences between these two countries, but let's look at some areas where they can cooperate, where there can be some progress. We know that both China and the United States are lead signatories to the Paris Climate Accord. They also have common interests in fighting the global pandemic that's hit us right now. We heard from our reporter that they're both interested in getting the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, back on track. What are the chances of progress on these issues where they can cooperate?
Well, I do believe that the world will be a better place if China and the United States can cooperate on many important international issues. You listed all these very important issues, and I believe these issues cannot really be handled properly without close China-US cooperation. And I think the cooperation will be more importantly at the initial stage on the global issues, including South DPRK nuclear issues, Iran nuclear issues, WHO cooperation, COVAX cooperation, and more importantly, global climate change, because this climate change issue is really a common menace to the United States as well as China and mankind at large. So how can China and the United States exercise their global responsibilities on these issues without cooperation, very close cooperation between these two largest economies in the world? And such cooperation is also highly expected by not only the Chinese people and the American people, but mankind as a large. So I have very high expectation that China and the United States will very soon start to have meaningful cooperation on these issues, and the goodwill effect will have a spillover effect into the bilateral issues, some of which very difficult to resolve between China and the United States. But we do not need to make giant steps to start with. We can take some baby steps going forward, so long as we move in the right direction. I believe either on the international front or on the domestic front, we need to be thinking positive about a better future of China-US relations, and this is the megatrend. We cannot afford to miss the megatrend, and the megatrend is China and the United States need to live and let live and need to get along with each other.
Bruce McConnell, trade remains a major issue between these two countries. We know about the tariffs that were slapped by each country against the other during the Trump administration. But there also seems to be a fundamental, almost a philosophical difference with these two countries and how that issue can be resolved. On the Chinese side, they've been talking about a win-win solution as far as trade is concerned. On the United States side, the United States seems to look at this in terms of a zero-sum context. How do they overcome that?
I think you're right. We need to have a win-win approach to trade and to all these issues, actually. And even though there can be competition, the United States is based on competition. So we have a term we use, co-opetition. So one competes one day and cooperates the next with the same party. I think we can do that between these two nations, these two great nations. And I think, in addition, that there are many other players. It's important, it is the most important bilateral relationship, but each side, if you will, has other players who are part of the trade equation. There are activities with India and Australia around rare earth metals. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization similarly is cooperating on various trade issues. So I think there's room here to have a subtle and more nuanced approach, and trade-offs can be made that will allow not only basic changes on tactical matters like tariffs, but some possibly structural changes about subsidies and things. So again, as Mr. Gao says, we have to take baby steps and stay positive.
John Gong, what are your thoughts on diffusing this trade war that's erupted between China and the United States? Do you think it would be possible to start with baby steps, like perhaps tackling the tariff issue and then moving on to other big issues like technology transfer, for instance?
Well, I think I've already talked about the prospect of the tariffs, but it's going to stay there for a while, I guess. But from Chinese side, at least, I think it's not much of a big deal. Now, regarding other issues, I think for things like intellectual property rights protection, market access, state-owned enterprises issues, all these things are gradually being addressed. I think China has already made great strides in the IPR protection area, as well as market access. Actually, if you look at the negative list issued by the Ministry of Commerce in the last few years, the list keeps shrinking and shrinking. And even on the SOE issue, China has openly said that it's willing to and will seek to join the CPTPP. This is a major movement, because one of the biggest hurdles, in my view, in terms of joining the CPTPP is the SOE issue. So I think on a range of these things, China is indeed moving in the direction that the United States government desires it to move into. So I think the more of a bigger problem here I want to talk about is, I think now is a disconnect between corporate America's interest here in China with the the middle class interests back home in the United States. I think this is actually a misperception You know, and also something that's kind of, you know, dangerous in my view. In terms of defining America's national interests, the corporate America's success in China is becoming less of a big component in that you know, national interest definition. So you know, this causes a problem because the politicians in Washington don't see that as a strong support for a bilateral relationship. And I think this is a misperception because corporate America's success here in China will and does circulate back to the home in their home states and home cities. Procter & Gamble, for example, you know, is creating a lot of jobs in Cincinnati. And you know, without a doubt, Procter & Gamble is widely successful here in China.
Okay, John Sitilides, before these talks took place in Alaska, Secretary of State Blinken, as well as the National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, visited Tokyo and Seoul. And we should remember that both Japan and South Korea are treaty allies of the United States. These trips showcase the Asia-Pacific alliance for the U.S. in a way. What do you think was the message the U.S. was sending there before the talks took place?
Well, I think it's a very important message that's largely a continuation of the Trump administration's policies in the region, Anand, and that is that the United States remains a steadfast ally and has got Japan and South Korea's backs, so to speak, in the event of diplomatic tensions or a potential military conflict in the region. And I think there was some question as to whether or not the United States would be that reliable ally on a military front, politically, trade-wise, and the like. And I think one of the first messages that this administration is looking to set is that the United States is not backing off in any manner as it pertains to defending its allies. And for that matter, I think you'll probably even see a stepped up delivery of major military hardware to Taiwan to allow for Taiwan to be better defended against any type of Chinese military operations in the years to come. So the most important message here is that the United States is and remains and will remain a Pacific power. It has no intention of slacking off on the security and defense of its allies. And it wants to send a very important message to China that what these countries perceive as Chinese bullying, say, for instance, the Coast Guard law changes of January to allow the Coast Guard to become a military-like organization near Japan's Senkaku Islands, is going to be met with a very strong, dedicated response from the United States and potentially from the Quad partners, because we saw also that President Biden had his virtual meeting with his Quad partners, and Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin is meeting with his counterparts in New Delhi in the days ahead.
Okay, Victor, very quickly, I've only got about 15 seconds left. There has been some talk that there could be a meeting between President Biden and President Xi Jinping taking place on April 22nd. That's Earth Day. That's to highlight, of course, the fight against climate change. What are the chances of that?
I truly believe a summit meeting between President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping will take place before the end of this year. Whether this is as early as in April or some other months of the year, I do not know. But I think the probability of having a summit is very great. And this, again, bodes well. The two leaders need to meet face to face. This is good news for both China and the United States.
Okay, and we have to leave it there. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.